Yo, what is going on, you guys? So today I'm bringing guys a brand new sports cards video. In today's video, I'm going to be breaking down the absolute worst sports card investments of 2024. A lot of these investments are down up to 90% of their value from before. So without further ado, let's hop right into the video. All right, guys, so the first player on our list is none other than Anthony Richardson. Now, Anthony Richardson has obviously not had an amazing season, but many could argue he hasn't had, a terrible season. He's definitely still shown glimpses of greatness. The issue, however, is his cards were priced in for him to be amazing this year. Before the season, his cards were priced at very, very high levels. I think a lot of investors are not giving players enough grace and time to, develop because of how high they get priced from their rookie years, or before they would even really play any meaningful football. So Anthony Richardson, for example, his Optic Downtown, this card had sales close to $3,000 before the season. This was all speculation throughout the summer. This card has come all the way down to the $600 to $700 range. His cards in the last 90 days are down nearly 60%. Now, this is just a classic example of you're buying into someone with such great expectations who has not proven himself yet. There is obviously a chance that Anthony Richardson could be that next star and take that jump like CJ Stroud did last year. However, I just think the risk-reward ratio was not there because his prices were already priced in quite high. So I just think this was kind of like the only way this was going to end. I kind of hate to say it. I just think if you're holding into the season for a young quarterback with expectations who's priced high, it's just going to be, the odds are stacked against you. I would say that much. You're placing a bet that's, not in your favor. For example, a lot of his cards are down up to 80%. This card right here is Orange Prism out of 249, PSA 10, $1,000 card before season, currently under $200. So this is just, a classic example of what happened there. Now, without further ado, we're going to hop right into the next pick, and this is none other than Victor Wembanyama. He's another guy who had an amazing rookie year. He's showing promise. He's still one of the greatest young stars in the NBA. However, his cards were priced in for, greatness. I don't know what he could have done for his cards to actually be picking up a lot more than they are right now. But the sheer issue I see with Wembanyama is that his pop counts are way, way, way too high. If you look at him being the highest graded player over the last couple months, and his cards being one of the highest graded players of all time, and his cards have barely been out a year. In the last 90 days, his cards are down over 30%. His Prism Silver is up to a pop nearly 4,000. His Prism Base, I believe, is like a pop 20,000 at this point. Pop 23,000. So his cards are just way, way, way too common. There's way, way, way too many options for his cards to really sustain the demand, and for the demand to exceed the supply, it's going to take so much sheerly because of how many of these cards there are. So I just don't know if there are enough buyers in the sports card market to handle, a player like Wembanyama, where his pop counts are just outrageous. So I just don't see the sports card market currently being in a place to handle all that supply. Maybe down the line there is a situation where that could be possible. I just think that's what's leading to a lot of this, like his Optic PSA 10s being a $40, $50 card. It's just there's too many cards of his. If this was pre, I would say pandemic, where pop counts were very low, a base Optic for a generational talent should be a couple $100 card at the bare minimum. However, we've just got to a point where they're printing too much. There's too many options, too many different card brands that are releasing cards, too many sets, and, too many PSA 10s, to be honest. I think PSA, these cards are grading very well. We see more than almost double the amount of PSA 10s as PSA 9s. So we're just seeing such great grades that are coming out, and that just makes PSA 10 super common. So that's definitely one player who's definitely gone down a lot. Another player who's gone down a lot is Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson, I think this last offseason had the smallest slimmer of hope, and that's what kept his cards alive. I think after what we've seen this year, I just don't know if there's that hope anymore. And we're seeing his cards react to that. His Prism Silver and a PSA 9, this card, at one point was well into the couple hundreds of dollars. This was a pretty solid card. Even during the offseason, it was down a lot, but it was still, a $30 to $40 card. Some sales as high as $60. It's overall, it was decent, but his cards come all the way down to around $10 for his Prism Silver PSA 9. His 10s have reacted similarly. His cards are down nearly 70%. I think this is a player where it's just, he was such a gamble. A lot of people were already buying in at low levels, so there was upside, but it simply was a bet that did not pay off. You can look even preseason, there was some hope. His PSA 10 Prism Silvers were around $150 probably on average. They're currently down to like $20 to $30. So that's just an ugly investment. I think for Deshaun collectors and investors, a lot of them are taking massive hits, and you can't really blame them. There's not much else that they could do at this point. Another player this year that has really gone under the expectations of what a lot of people thought he would do is none other than Trevor Lawrence. Now, Trevor Lawrence, I would say offseason of 23, his hype was, I would say at an all-time high. I would say probably not an all-time high just because, he had, coming into his rookie year, his hype was insane. But after they had beat that Chargers in that comeback game in that playoffs, his prices were sitting very high. And even this offseason, they did have some hope. There were people in Trevor Lawrence's market hoping for him to have another jump in his game this offseason or this season. They've got a great receiver in Brian Thomas Jr., but the Jaguars are just not playing well. This card right here that was a $100 plus card before the season is already getting a lot of sales in the $50 range. And we're just seeing his cards, down around 40% in the last 90 days. I think Trevor Lawrence is another player where he's just not meeting expectations. His prices were priced in, for a number one pick, and he's just not performing like a number one pick. And I think that's what a lot of people, are noticing, and that's why his cards are going down a lot. So T-Law is definitely another player in that list that has taken some big shavings off of his prices. Now, next up, we've got none other than Bryce Young. Now, Bryce Young, his cards are down around 60% over the last 90 days. I would say he has not even, he's played, he hasn't had that season that a lot of people were hoping for, when they're buying his cards. However, for, a second-year player on a team with not too many weapons, I would honestly say it could take years. I would personally not be a buyer in Bryce Young's market. I think it's just super risky. It's like a gamble. But, the same people who are buying into his cards before the season for $400, what's kind of funny is they're not buying in now at around $100, for his rookie Kings. I understand, obviously, he hasn't had the best year, but I think it was a similar situation as before the year. I mean, last year he didn't have a great year either. I think the expectations were just a little bit overwhelming for Bryce Young in the sports card market, at least, for how, investors priced him. A lot of people were buying into his cards heavy. A lot of people were speculating on him after already not seeing great play. And I think we're just seeing more of the same of that. He's clearly not fully developed. He's showing some signs of greatness. He has some great throws every game. I would say he's definitely played better recently, at least as I'm recording this video. I just don't see his supply, being met by demand right now. And I think it's a risky bet right now. At least if you're buying in now, you're buying in at 20% of what it was before the season. So at least you've got that more upside and that more cushion of downside, because now his expectations are down a lot, which is good. And we are currently seeing his cards more so stable out, which is a good sign. I won't lie. I still just think they're pretty risky, but a lot of people have lost a lot of money in Bryce Young's market. And I just think it was another example of a speculating quarterback, that did not quite pan out. Now, next up, we've got a lot of people who invest in players and they just get injured. or they just have, injury scares, I'd say. Of course, Tua's back right now, but I would say in general, the injury scare at the beginning of the year really crushed his market, especially being head injuries and his history of head injuries. If we look at his national treasures, some of his higher end cards, this card right here was a $6,000 to $7,000 card preseason, currently shaved in half. I think Tua's at that point in his career, at least for the sports card market, where I think people just haven't quite seen that jump that a lot of people are hoping for, especially with, amazing receivers. I think his cards, right now, they're down another 35% in the last 90 days. I personally would see them as super risky just because if he has another year where he doesn't fully, take that jump, I think it could be just, not quite what we're seeing with Deshaun yet, but I think it could be heading that direction if it doesn't pick up at some point. And of course, with Tua, I'm just always nervous in his market because one injury away and there's talks about his career being over. Every time he has a head injury, there's talks about his career being over, and there's so much fear in the market. So that's why I'm personally just not a big Tua investor. And clearly his cards have not really performed well this year. Now, next up, we're going to go with the guy who's, I would not say anyone really expected his cards to do good. However, the issue is that a lot of people are buying in for the collectible aspect. Before the season, soon after he got drafted, we saw a lot of his university cards sell for very strong numbers. We saw this PSA 10 auto from Bowman Sapphire be like a $700 card. It's currently down to $240. I think Bronny James is a classic example of someone who was in the spotlight. He was fresh on the scene. Everyone was hyped. Not to say about his play necessarily, but just to even see him play with his dad on the court. There was just excitement around his name. And that over time for anyone is going to wear off. There's no one who has, there's no one who's in the spotlight at all times besides those all-time greats. So you're just not going to see, I don't think many people expect to see Bronny James in the spotlight for a long period of time. Like, it's a great story, but I just think in general, his cards, I just don't see them being too much in the long term, and I think a lot of people are realizing that right now, and that's why his cards are just, coming down. They're still up over the last 90 days because of the hype, but they've really come down over the last 30 days or so. So Bronny James is definitely in that category of, I would say one of the worst investments of 2024. Now, next up on our list is none other than Will Levis. Will Levis was another player who I think people saw some hope in before the season. A lot of people get a little bit too optimistic before the season. And then, he hasn't had a horrible year, but he has not taken the leap that anyone expected him to. And that's leading to his cards really getting demolished in price. I mean, his Prism PSA 10 is down to like, a $10 to $20 card. Preseason, this card was upwards of $40. Some sales much higher. This is just another classic example like the Bryce Young and, Victor Wembanyama's. Not to compare the players, but to compare the situation and people pricing them in for future expectation and then them not quite, meeting the expectation or just, the hype not being there as much as it was before. Before people had seen him play too much, and when people had seen some glimpses, the hope is up here, and when, he's not quite performing, the hope comes down. So I think Will Levis is in that boat, and that's why we're seeing his cards down almost 70% over the last 90 days. His cards were priced insane. I believe some of his Black Finites, or I should say his Black Finite, and some of his rare cards had sold for insane numbers before the year. We can see, his PSA 10 had sold on alt right before the season for $42,000. This card alt currently says is like a $10,000 to $17,000 card. So, that's pretty much around a 60 to 70% loss, for that card and for the higher end investors of Will Levis's market. So definitely not a chart you want to see if you're an investor. But I really hope y'all enjoyed this video. If you guys enjoyed, make sure to drop a like and subscribe. I really appreciate all the support that you guys have been showing me recently. And other than that, I hope y'all enjoyed, and I'm out.